I am a beehive of cells, each conditioned by his own horoscope. Touch me at any point and I will metamorphose into a new configuration of color and sound. If at dawnbreak I may affirm, dusk is the moment to recant, and noontime is just for a discreet retreat.
My earliest memory of writing poetry is when I was 7, 8 years old. And my mother used to see me scribbling something on pieces of paper. And I remember one morning she said, "What are you doing out there, Shiv?" "Mom, I am writing poetry." "Oh boy, so you want to be a poet? Do you know then you will die a pauper?" "I don't care," I replied to my mother. "I want to be a poet. This will be my greatest ambition in life." Although I wrote my first poem as a schoolboy, as editor of the school magazine, and the poem was titled "A Portrait Painter," in which God first makes a sketch of a beautiful woman and then breathes into it, and the woman rises from canvas like birth of Venus. But the poem that God published was the one that I wrote when I lost my mother. I was the youngest in the family. My mother loved me as a little baby. She never felt that I was growing up. When I lost her, this was the end of the world for me. So I wrote a poem titled "An Encounter with Death." And I never stopped writing poetry.
For 13 days, say the Hindus, the departed soul hovers around its earthly habitat. And so for 13 days, I have communed with the spirit. Whenever a door handle rattles, a nipping wind howls, the dog whines, or the bluebells clang, I feel her presence within me.
Thereafter, my experience of getting a poem published abroad was a poem that I wrote when I was a visiting professor in the USA. The poem is titled "Border Guards," and this poem appeared on the editorial page of the New York Times. I was so excited that I felt like Lord Byron, who said after he had published Childe Harold, that book of poems, and he's supposed to have said, "One morning I awoke and found myself famous."
On the other side of the impregnable fence, enmeshed with warlords' gory threats and counter-threats, whimpers my counterpart over a letter from home. His wife's illness, his son's death, his recoilless gun sitting negligently between his knees. My fingers bleed to think of the fence's spikes that will not let me caress the anguished face of the other man. My country's alleged enemy, but my soulmate in loneliness.
Poem is the most emotional form of writing. When you write prose, it is not emotion that really makes it sound creatively exciting. It is in a poem, the emotion that goes into it. Writing a poem, or for that matter, writing anything creative, is a therapeutic experience. You overcome your grief through articulating it. If you don't articulate your grief, your agony, it remains shut up in your system and it creates disturbance. So you get a sense of release Out of your pain, you express it, articulate it, you externalize your pain.
9 months after a brief mating of image and idea during a chance encounter at sunset. Stirrings in the womb. But the pain of deliverance is both lancet and balm. A chrysalis now wings about on the white paper, peers at its own shadow as it crawls from line to line, stanza to stanza.
1947, when India lay divided, I traveled from Pakistan to India, escorted by armed policemen. My family was one of the 500 families accommodated on a refugee train from Lahore to Delhi. As the train rattled through patches of light and darkness, I felt as though I was on a ghost train. On either side of the rail track, I saw piles of dead bodies lying, men, women, and children. It was nightmarish. I could not get over this trauma, and that is how I wrote this novel. Like my other fellow Punjabi novelists, Khashwant Singh, Bhisham Sani, and Mulkaj Anand, I feel that every Punjabi writer had to get this pain out of the system. In my case, it was this novel that helped me come to terms with my inner agony.
Suddenly, a flock of birds shot into the sky and began to circle joyously over the maize fields on either side, as though scornful of the happenings on the earth below. Their spangled wings, poised securely against the wind, glimmered in the morning sun. Their puny belly tanks, charged with some inexhaustible fuel, they flew round and round, up and down, and warbled.
I could not write a poem on partition. In my poem of Delhi, there are only snippets of partition, but the entire experience of suffering, of women being raped, men brutally slaughtered, and how I left my homeland, Lahore, could not be contained. It would be like containing a river in a glass, a sea in a bottle. So it had to be a wider landscape, and that's how the novel alone could help me.
Your tryst with destiny, that midnight when you were still a virgin, unravished, your roads, streets, and bylanes carried fresh blood in your veins. Then came into your territory a swarm of bees, unhoused by a blaze of communal fire. You hosted them all on your outskirts, at Kingsway and Mehrauli refugee camps. There I lived for a short while in one of the pigeonholes.
The train reached Delhi. I landed up to see that I had no job, no house. I was helpless. Then, fortunately, someone mentioned to me that Sardar Patel is accessible, but you have to meet him during his early morning walk, which was much before dawnbreak. I needed a job and help, so I got up early in the morning, 4:30, walked up to Aurangzeb Road, and there I saw Sardar Patel walking up from behind with a group of people with him. Meera Bahan, his principal private secretary V. Shankar. As he saw me walking up from the opposite side, Sardar Patel stopped. There were no security guard those days. He smiled and asked me, "Young man, you have a problem?" I said, "Yes, sir. I'm a refugee from Pakistan. I have no job, no house." To cut the story short, within 2 days, I was appointed Program Executive Officer in All India Radio. I was born a rebel, I could not allow myself to be treated authoritarianly by any individual or institution. As a program executive officer of All India Radio, I was asked to write a script in which there was a paragraph which was critical of the government of India, the way it was treated refugees. My director said, "You have forgotten, Mr. Kumar, that you are an employee of the central government. You can't criticize." I said, "I get the message, sir. Okay." The next morning, I resigned. But my misfortunes had not come to an end. A year later, I saw my marriage cracking on the rocks. There were serious differences between me and my wife, and I knew there was no other way out except divorce.
After the dead raised their flagstaff, the stone moved at the crossroads. All word and gesture expended, we draw a line across the sand, sharp and deep.
I felt the moment had come for me to fold up my old self and leave it behind and seek new adventures. 3 crises in anyone's life would be too much for him to bear: partition, joblessness, divorce. That was enough. In those days, I used to hum to myself a couplet. गम अगर से इतने देने थे तो दिल भी यारब कई कई दिए होते. A friend of mine got me a cheap berth on a cargo boat which was loaded with rice, vegetable, sugar and wheat. As the boat was sailing through the Arabian waters, I saw the boat furrowing through the dark sea. I was on my way to England. The most significant moment in my life, if I may say, was meeting an Indian research scholar at Cambridge, who was not a student of literature, who was a research scholar working in the area of physics and biochemistry, Roop Sani. I met him during my second week at Cambridge, when I felt that I had run out of my money, that I will have to pack up and come back home. Cambridge was no place for me. It was only for the rich people. I went out for my evening walk and I was freezing when I saw an Indian young man walking towards me from the opposite side. He must have seen me completely shattered up. And he said, "Hello, are you from India or Pakistan?" I said, "Well, from both. I was born in Pakistan and now I come from India. You seem to be new this place." "Yes, I am, because I haven't seen you. And you seem to be thoroughly disappointed." I said, "Well, let me share with you. I am completely broken. I have no money, and I feel that I cannot stay at Cambridge for more than a week more. I must pack up and go back home." He said, "Wait a minute. What is your name?" I said, "Shiv Kumar." "That name rings a bell. You were in Lahore, a lecturer?" Meka, "Yes." "Do you remember a young man who was one of your students, Pannala?" I said, "Of course. He was one of the most brilliant students. He was my younger brother. So I owe something to you. You come with me to my apartment. Let me say, if there is any man who made my life, it was Roop Sani." One of the redeeming features of my stay abroad was that I had several opportunities of meeting some of the most celebrated personalities of the time. I would manage to get a little scholarship to go to Europe or to USA, and during my travel, I met these great celebrities. At Cambridge, of course, I had made friends with E.M. Foster. He was a lover of Indian culture and Indian. So whenever I ran short of money, I will go up to him. Mr. Foster, can I interview you please? But Kumar, you interviewed me last week, but I need money again. Meeting Octavio Paz was a very touching experience. When I was talking to him in a hotel room, it began to drizzle, and I could see that he was watching the raindrops forming patterns on the glass pane. I had lost track with him, and when we finished talking, I said, I didn't want to disturb you. You were looking at the raindrops. He says, rain fascinates me. And I said, okay, then let me tell you, rain fascinates me as well. Then in England, I met T.S. Eliot, who was then director of Faber and Faber. And so I met so many people, and meeting these personalities also acted as a balm on my blues stone. When I returned from England with a doctorate in English literature from Cambridge, I felt that I was holding a passport to any position at any university in India. I chose Usmania because of the ambience, the atmosphere of the city with its legendary past. And that is where I spent 18 years of my career as a teacher. Teaching, I think, is in my blood. My father was a teacher, so was my grandfather. So I love teaching, but I have always felt that teaching should be an extension of oneself. Because if you relate what you lecture in the classroom, you are inviting your student to relate themselves to the life outside. Teaching, therefore, was with me a passion. And then things happened to me. I had a house in Delhi which got embroiled in litigation. This experience made me write a poem which became well known, Tees Hazari Ko.
From the murky corridors of this labyrinth, there's no escape. Since time began, I watched the victims enter from the eastern gate, and then only the smoke exits from the other end. It's the long wait that kills the lover, the cancer patient, and yes, the petitioner.
So it was a kind of awakening. Why don't I take to writing myself? And then first I took to writing in my spare time. Then after retirement, this was all my life. जब तुम नहीं होगे तो तेरी याद रहेगी और दुनिया मेरी आबाद की आबाद रहेगी. My fascination for poetry is multidimensional. Faiz fascinated me when I started writing poetry because he was a poet after my heart. I met him in Hyderabad in 1979, the days of emergency, and I was asked to preside over his poetry reading. I felt honored. But in my presidential remarks, I said, ये रहे फैज साहिब, हम वतन, हम ज़बां, हम पेशा. But what touched me very deeply was that Faiz was a very humble man. I said, Faiz Sahib, I am going to dedicate the next 3 years of my life translating your work.
This daybreak pockmarked, this morning night bitten. Surely this is not the morning we longed for.
Translation is also a creative exercise. Both the original writer and the translator, they sing a duet. They have to be on the same emotional wavelength. It was a great experience. The basic reason was that we were both Indian writers. Our imagery, our feeling for emotional intensity, which you don't find in most Western poetry, I found in Fairs, and I wanted to recreate that thing myself. And that is how I found translating Fairs a great experience. But my affair with Fairs lasted all through my life. So I wrote two collections of poems. One is titled Intezar and the other is titled Tum Kaho Main Suno. नींद तो सरमाया है फकत फरिश्तों का, मुझे तो रात भर नींद नहीं आती, तैरता रहता हूं एक माही की तरह आबे आतिश में, आंखें खुली और दिल की धड़कन जारी. But unfortunately, English had become my first language. So I kept returning to English and I felt more comfortable with English because Urdu requires a sophisticated use of its diction. And I thought at one time that I should have lived a lifetime with Urdu in order to write in it. It was not only Faiz who influenced me, but like Dal, Zog, but amongst the contemporary poets, it was Ahmad Faraz. Ahmad Faraz shaped into one of the most likable, admirable Urdu poets. आज जाने की जिद न करो, आज जाने की जिद न करो, यूं ही पहलू में बैठे. I must confess that this intensity and imagery in Urdu poetry has also influenced me. It will be unfair if I don't bring in my father. He was a scholar. Professionally, he was headmaster of his school. He was a staunch Arya Samajist, and his little god on the earth was Swami Dayanand. So he preached to me that, remember, child, that Swami Dayanand never believed in idol worship. That is where a fundamental difference cropped up between my father and myself. He forgot that as a poet, to me, a woman was an idol. Falling in love with a woman is idol worship. And how could one write a poem without your visual imagination coming into play? I wish I could share with him that couplet by Mirza Ghalib. तुम तो बुद्ध हो, तुम्हें पिंदारे खुदाई क्यों है, चलो तुम खुदावंद ही कहलाओ, खुदा और सही. It's a kind of nostalgia that brings me to my friends, to my colleagues who are now dead and gone. I remember them because they were a part of my life. With the death of anyone in my life, I feel that a limb of my body is gone.
Where have they gone, I wonder? Midnight. Outside, the owl's hoot is summoning all the ghosts to take over from the living. I hear the dead whispering like a brood of snakes hissing, or like the drone of muffled drums beating the retreat.
I have several different selves, several different modes of feeling. In fact, I have written a poem called Which of My Selves Do You Wish to Speak to? I am bright in the morning. I am a little tense in the afternoon. and I feel very melancholic in the evening. So I am carnal, physical, down to earth, and I also feel spiritual.
I am a beehive of cells, each conditioned by his own horoscope. When I meet you at the street corner, would you greet me with a word or a gesture? And remember, I may then respond in a language that only shadows understand. So which of my selves do you wish to address? And have you chosen the right time and place?
Poet is a seeker. In order to get to his dream, to his destination, he has to make detour, follow all kinds of ways, direct or twisted. वो कहते हैं जिंदगी वो तो हादसों का हजूम था। ठीक है, ये तो कहिए मेरा ही काम था कि मैं दरमियान से निकल गया।